Joining us right now is Ohio Senator Rob Portman. And Senator, it's great to see you this morning. I want to start with a report that was out last week suggesting that the 10 Republican senators who are moderates and who are looking for bipartisan sort of solutions have grown pretty frustrated. They listed you as one of those people. They've grown frustrated because they don't think the Biden administration actually wants bipartisan activity at this point. Do you think that, or do you think there really is room for compromise here?
Well, we'll see. The rhetoric of the campaign and even the inaugural address was we want to bring people together, and President Biden has said that, but the action certainly hasn't matched it. With regard to the COVID-19 bill, as you know, Democrats chose to use reconciliation, meaning they didn't need Republican votes, and so they didn't get any, and they put it through, in a way that, was not focused on COVID-19. They're doing it again with infrastructure because the proposal, $2.7 trillion, only has about 20%. If you use a generous definition of infrastructure, less than 5% is for roads and bridges. So it seems like they're heading down the same track. But on the other hand, they're starting to say that they'd like to work with us. We'd love to. We've got some ideas. We think, one, you start with real infrastructure. That kind of makes sense if you're doing an infrastructure package. And two, you come up with ways to pay for it that aren't going to hurt American workers, which is exactly what their tax hikes would do.
What's your idea in terms of how to pay for it?
Well, Becky, first of all, if you start off with something like 20% of the package, which is what, again, generously speaking, would be infrastructure, that would include water infrastructure. It would include things like broadband expansion. It would include things that maybe haven't traditionally been in infrastructure, but could be considered infrastructure. That's a good start because then your pay-fors are less. Second, obviously, there already is a user fee out there, which is the gas tax and other excise taxes. That could pay for about half of it. And for the rest of it, I mean, there's some great ideas. One would be to actually use some of the money that was in COVID-19, much of which, as you know, has not gone out the door yet. The majority of it has not been spent. Our state of Ohio, other states and municipalities and counties and so on are looking for ways to spend this money, as you know, $350 billion. And a lot would like to spend it on infrastructure. Well, perhaps there's a way to spend some of that money on infrastructure as part of this legislation, and then perhaps have the local match, which is usually about 20%, so it's 80% federal funding, 20% local, have that match go up some, and that would provide some of the funding to help with this new infrastructure. I know there are a lot of states interested in that, as well as localities, because, again, they'd like to have the flexibility to use this money for crumbling infrastructure. I think that's a really interesting idea. Second is electric vehicles. Why should they not pay anything for the use of our roads and bridges, or hybrids for that matter? Being the owner of a hybrid pickup truck, I should pay something in addition to what I'm paying for the gas. So that's another idea. Vehicle miles traveled is something that's been talked about, particularly with regard to electric vehicles. And a lot of the trucking companies are interested in that, as long as the money goes towards real infrastructure, roads and bridges and so on. So there's ways to put this together. There's also, as you know, interest among some to invest in infrastructure, so-called PPP, or public-private partnerships. That's another way to do it. So there are ways to do this without hurting America's competitiveness and hurting American workers, which is what the tax increases would do.
News out this morning that Senator Elizabeth Warren has now invited Leon Cooperman to your Senate Finance Committee next week to talk about taxes. Of course, they've been in quite a back and forth for quite some time. How much do you think individual taxes and individual tax rates are going to get into this conversation? And do you expect Leon Cooperman to accept the invitation?
I don't know about Leon, but I do know that it's very likely you're going to see additional proposals for tax increases. This is what President Biden has pledged. He has said that it will be only for higher income individuals. But as you know, our pass-throughs, which are 90% of the businesses in America, pay their taxes as individuals. So it's going to hurt those small businesses, and it's going to hurt our economy. And so far it's corporate taxes, which makes us non-competitive. After we finally got competitive, after we finally put in place tax provisions that increased investment in the United States, $1.6 trillion of earnings came back from overseas before COVID-19 and after the tax bill was passed. We also had increases in R&D, 25% increase in research and development among America's biggest companies, and a 20% improvement in infrastructure spending for companies. In other words, for companies themselves, putting more money into capital assets. This is all good stuff. We also had the lowest poverty rate in the history of our country and unemployment at 3.5%. and the 19th straight month of 3% or more job growth in February before COVID. So things were going well, and some of it was attributed to the tax relief and the tax reform. So I hope we don't go down that path, Andrew, because I think it would be exactly the wrong thing to do as we try to recover from the pandemic.
Hey, Senator, separately, I just wanted to ask you about a different topic, which is guns and mass shootings in America. Smith & Wesson can't make guns fast enough. They're literally flying off the shelves at the moment. And the House, as you know, has put together a bill that I'm told, and from what I've seen you say, you believe is too broad. Clearly, we don't want, I think we were both in agreement, we don't want guns in the hands of the wrong folks. Why do you think it would be too broad, for example, to extend the background check time from 3 days, for example, to 10 days?
Well, I think there are ways to tighten background checks, and I think you'll see some bipartisan agreement on that coming together over the next even few weeks here. I'm having a meeting on that later today. I do think that there are big concerns with the House bill because it does go too far in a number of respects, including the simple transfer of a gun from a family member. It could be a gift, as an example, and you could be subject to penalties, including criminal penalties. So I think there's some things that go too far there. But I do think there's an interest in tightening background checks more, being sure the right information's in the system. I think there's also some interest in some sort of a way to identify people who have mental health histories and obvious concerns, family members and friends and so on, as long as there's due process involved. That's when you look at these shootings, that tends to be the issue.
Just to put a fine point on it, on the background check issue specifically, do you object to a longer background check period? I mean, my sense, I'll just tell you my feeling is that if you need a gun within the context of 3 days, there's a larger problem that probably should be dealt with in the context of law enforcement.
Well, that's an interesting comment, Andrew. I don't know that that's true. I mean, somebody might feel the need for protection because they live in a violent neighborhood, as an example, and that person may feel the need to protect herself or himself or their family. So I don't know. I haven't looked at that part of the bill in detail. What I have looked at is ways you could take the current background system and make it work better, including providing much better information, especially with regard to things like mental health, where right now many of the states are not providing that data in a timely manner. And there's a way to do that. And there's also a way, as I said again, to help identify people in advance and again, with due process. But when you look at these shootings, in many situations, the background check wouldn't have helped, but it would have helped if individuals had had the ability to go to law enforcement to say something's wrong here and then have some sort of a process to identify that person in advance. So anyway, those are things I think that could happen and could actually make a difference.
Hey, Senator Portman, I hear that you are working on a bill to try and define cryptocurrency for tax purposes and try and keep it from being able to be used for tax evasion, things like Bitcoin. What's in that bill? When can we expect to see it?
Well, we're still working on it. I probably shouldn't have talked about it at a hearing a couple weeks ago because we don't have the final bill yet. But the idea is to have better information reporting on cryptocurrency and to define it better for tax purposes. There is, as we heard a few weeks ago at this hearing, $1 trillion tax gap right now. Some of that tax gap is attributable to the cryptocurrency issue, not certainly all of it or even most of it. But that's one of the issues that Republicans and Democrats alike are interested in pursuing. So we hope to introduce it on a bipartisan basis here, probably right after this next congressional recess. We're still pulling information in. But I do think that's one of the issues we ought to be addressing to try to close that tax gap. The tax gap meaning taxes that aren't being collected. Think about that. If we could have more of that tax coming in, we wouldn't have to be talking so much about these pay-fors because we'd have more revenue coming into the Treasury from people who do owe taxes.
Because you think Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies are being used to evade taxes, or because you just think we're not up to snuff and kind of tracking it and making sure we keep on top of it?
Well, I think it's both. Becky, I think primarily it's a lack of information reporting, which always is historically worked to help increase compliance. And so I think that's part of it. It's just a reporting requirement, perhaps a new form. But we're looking at all these issues and trying to figure out the best way forward.
I know that you were one of the people who got the Johnson & Johnson vaccine early on. We have since heard about some problems in a very small number of people who have been vaccinated, something like just 7 or 8 cases, or just a small number of the 7 to 8 million people who have been vaccinated with the J&J shot. You've also been trying to get people back in your home state in Ohio to take on the vaccine. What do you hear? What do you think, first of all, about the J&J news? And what do you hear from people in your home state when you try and convince them to get vaccinated?
Yeah, take the shot. I mean, I think it's incredibly important for my constituents and for their families, but also for the broader community that people get vaccinated. And we're making progress. We're over 50% in Ohio. The progress has slowed a little bit recently, and so I think there's a need for us to do more outreach and to let people know these vaccines are safe, they're effective. In Ohio, you can get the Moderna or the Pfizer vaccine if you're over 16. Just show up. There are actually appointments that are open right now. So I'm encouraging people to move forward. I did join the trial early on because I wanted to encourage more people to get into the trials. They needed more participants, but also to show people that, that I believed it was worth doing this, to keep my family safe and to help keep our broader community safe. And you're right, it's less than 10 individuals, and they tend to be women. It tends to happen right after the shot, as I understand it, and these were blood clots. But that's out of millions. You said 6 to 7 million. I don't know the number right now globally, but it's millions of people. So I'm confident that the FDA and others in the scientific community are doing the research and doing the background to be sure that every potential issue is addressed, so that the J&J vaccine is safe as well. Right. But in the meantime, the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines are out there in Ohio and around the country, and let's get vaccinated and let's move on to a more normal life where we can get back to school and back to work and right. and back to going out. So my hope is that people will take advantage of it.
Hey, Senator, real quick, given your comments about crypto and tax evasion on that front, I'm curious, are you supportive overall, and I think some of your Republican peers have not been, of better funding the IRS? I ask because I, like you, believe that if we can collect money that the government is ultimately already due, and there are some studies suggesting up to $600 billion a year are effectively being evaded, if there was additional investment made in the IRS to collect that money, we might not be having the same kind of conversation about raising taxes to the degree that I think in certain instances you object to.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree, and I've been consistent on that since, 15 years ago when I was involved in the IRS reform efforts. If you're a small business person in America, you want to have somebody competent who's going to show up at your doorstep. If you're going to get audited and the person is overworked and not properly trained or qualified, it's a problem. So I think it's important to provide adequate resources, including to provide better taxpayer service, because when you call the IRS or when you're emailing, with the IRS trying to get information, it's very difficult. And by the way, that leads to less collection. If somebody can't get through and can't get the answers, that person understandably is frustrated and may not be paying the full amount due. So yeah, let's provide better service, let's provide more professionalism, and let's be sure the tax system works better. I've never quite understood this argument that it's better to cut the IRS budget because it doesn't help my constituents who have to deal with the tax collector. You might as well do it in a more professional, efficient way. So yeah, I'm for that, and I think it would help in terms of collections.
Hey, Senator Portman, thanks for your time today. It's really good to see you.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Becky. Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Joe.
Coming up on the other side